Welcome to 5 Minute Bible, your daily guide for your daily reading. Today's February the 6th, and we'll be looking at Exodus 22 through 24. Now today's reading brings the covenant into sharp focus. Exodus 22 through 24 shows us what God's holiness looks like when it moves from thunder at the top of the mountain into the fabric of everyday life at the ground, and how that covenant is formally sealed. Now, redemption has already happened. The law has been spoken. Now God is binding himself to his people in a covenant that is as gracious as it is weighty. And the question hanging over the entire section is not whether Israel understands God's commands, but whether God understands Israel's hearts. Exodus 22 continues the case law that we saw in Exodus 21, pressing God's holiness down into the everyday bits of life. And these laws govern all kinds of areas, whether it be restitution or personal responsibility or protection of the vulnerable and the absolute rejection of false worship. God is shaping a redeemed society not merely by issuing spiritual rules, but he's showing them that covenant faith touches everything: your money, your property, your justice, your sexuality, your hospitality, and power. Holiness is not abstract in the Bible. It is lived out on the ground. And that leads to Exodus 23, where it gathers these laws into promises and warnings. God assures Israel that obedience is going to bring them blessings and protections, while compromise is going to invite death and danger. He promises to send his angel before them, driving out their enemies, but not all at once. Because victory usually comes gradually through trust and through patience and through obedience and through learning over time. God rarely rushes and almost never brings Israel into a quick triumph. He's using the slowness of his redemption to form them. Now, Exodus 24 then begins to bring everything to a dramatic climax. Moses reads the words of the law aloud. The people respond with this great amount of confidence. All that the Lord has said and spoken, we will do. And then, critically, the covenant is sealed with blood. Sacrifices are offered. Blood is sprinkled. And God himself binds himself to this people, even as Moses ascends the mountain of God to dwell in the presence of God for 40 days and 40 nights. There, the covenant is ratified, not with optimism, but with sacrifice. And that leads us to our governing question that I want you to be asking yourself today. Why does God bind himself to a people that he knows is going to fail? And Exodus 22 through 24 forces us to wrestle with this, with a God whose covenant faithfulness is not grounded in his foreknowledge of our sin or even in our pitiful attempts at human reliability, but in his own divine mercy. You see, the central pattern in Exodus 22 through 24 is covenant grace, especially in the face of known weaknesses. God gives laws that are good and just and life-giving and holy, and the people hear them and sincerely commit themselves to obeying them. And yet, God immediately seals the covenant with blood because he knows their disobedience is coming. He is pre-covering them before their disobedience occurs. And that is the tension, because God's not naive. He doesn't enter into covenant with illusions about human ability or strength. He binds himself to Israel fully aware of their fragility, their fear, and their future rebellion. The blood does not celebrate their obedience or even their willful motivation. It anticipates their failure and covers them before it happens. And this brings us directly into our own life as well, because we often think that God stays committed to us because we stay faithful, but Exodus says the opposite. God's covenant faithfulness is what carries his people through their unfaithfulness. And obedience, yes, of course it matters, but it always is downstream of grace. It is always downstream of the blood of the Lamb, not our ability. And in that way, Exodus 22 through 24 points clearly and powerfully to Jesus, because the covenant that Jesus brings is sealed with his blood before we're ever commanded to obey. In the Old Covenant, animals die to maintain the relationship, and in the New Covenant, Christ himself becomes the everlasting sacrifice that will not fail and will ever hold this relationship between us and God intact. Moses ascends the mountain as a mediator, but he's only foreshadowing Jesus, who enters the true presence of God on behalf of his people forever. Where Israel promises obedience that it can't sustain, Christ offers obedience that will never fail. Where the covenant is sealed with borrowed blood, the new covenant is going to be sealed with the blood of the Lamb, with the blood of the Son, with the blood of God's chosen King. God himself binds himself to a failing people because in the space of time, he is going to provide a faithful representative. The covenant does not rest on Israel's resolve, but it rests on the future obedience of Jesus Christ. And as you read Exodus 22 through 24, I want you to pay careful attention to the moment that the people say, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." They're saying it sincerely, they're saying it hopefully, and yet it's fragile. Tomorrow, we're going to see how quickly all of their human confidence collapses and why God's covenant faithfulness must be stronger than our human intentions. And with that, I want you to read your Bible carefully, devotionally, and joyfully, and may the Lord use his word to sanctify you completely, and we will continue our journey tomorrow. God bless you.